Hi everybody, here's a little series of slides that I'm going to narrate that will give us a look at some aspects of community structure or biome structure. So far we know that communities are made up of different populations of organisms, different species, all living in the same place and time. We need to think about how those species are arranged in space. One of the simplest diagrams that allows us to do that is a lollipop diagram, such as the one we see here. In this lollipop diagram, we see a number of different levels to this forest, starting at the top with the blue tree that's labeled in red. In their diagram, it says dominant. We also sometimes call these trees emergent, and these are our biggest trees, greatest in height, often greatest in width at the trunk. They are incredibly good competitors. They are able to access lots and lots of sunlight, and they're also going to be the dominant individuals in the forest. So they're going to take up a lot of water and a lot of nutrient. If we continue along down the line, we see the canopy labeled in orange. These are also sometimes called co-dominant trees. The canopy is a continuous layer of trees that forms an even shaded area below. The canopy is typically going to be comprised of trees that are of even age, so they're all about the same age, or sometimes we say they're in the same cohort. We have the understory trees beneath them. So these are shorter trees, sometimes labeled intermediate or suppressed. These shorter trees are the ones that aren't getting enough nutrients, aren't getting enough sunlight, because they're shaded out by the canopy above. They might be slightly younger than the canopy trees themselves, but they may be of similar age within their layer. So all those yellow ovals that you see are probably trees of about the same age that have grown up together, and they're just not quite getting enough sunlight and nutrient in order to be the dominants or in order to join the canopy. What would happen is if we had a storm and some part of the canopy were to open up, if a tree fell down, a gap in the canopy would allow us to see sunlight penetrating. It would free up nutrients, it would free up water, and so those intermediate and the suppressed trees, which we see below in orange, would be able to shoot up very quickly, because again, these are older trees that just simply aren't growing to their full height because they're not getting enough access to resources. If we keep going down below, we see shrubs, the shrub layer. It's also known for the regeneration layer. That's smaller trees and shrubs that are sort of coming back after they've started to grow in. And then way down at the bottom, the forbs and grasses. Think of this as our herb layer, so flowers, things like that. Anything that's not really woody, it doesn't have a woody stem to it. So the flowers, the grasses, forbs are another category that we can think of. Mosses would also qualify here. And this is a nice diagram of that vertical tree layer. I also asked you to think about horizontal structure in your last homework. Horizontal structure shows us what do we come into contact with as we walk across the land. So in the top diagram, you can see that there are three pretty distinct groupings of trees. We have these tall pine-like trees over on the far left, and then there's sort of a mixed group of trees where they seem to be all different sizes and shapes, and then that forest as we travel to the right starts to get pretty uniform. So that would be the horizontal structure. Where are these different trees growing in space? Where are they in relationship to one another? What do I come into contact with as I walk across the surface of the land? This is horizontal structure. Horizontal structure can be deeply impacted by the presence or absence of other species. So species that dig their roots deep into the soil tend to grow a little bit closer to other species than species that spread their roots out side to side. You don't want to be fighting for water or nutrient in the soil, and so if you have species such as black walnut trees or cacti in the desert. Lots of these trees will exude toxins to keep the roots of other plants away. This is a process known as allelopathy. And so that deeply impacts horizontal structure. In addition, we can think of horizontal structure being impacted by the presence of resources. Do you have evenly distributed water, or is the water found in little pockets here and there? Do you have evenly distributed soil nutrients, or are there highs and lows as we sample the soil? So that really fine detail in terms of what resources are available where has a large impact on the horizontal structure. Here's just another diagram that shows both the vertical structure and the horizontal structure using some really simplified diagrams. So at the top we see the horizontal structure. How open is this forest or grassland or whatever biome we're looking at? How evenly spaced are those different species? Are they growing very close to one another in little clumps? Are they growing evenly spaced? Are they evenly spaced with openings? Might that be a gap in the canopy that's opened up as the result of a tree falling down in a storm? And so on. And then we see another picture of the vertical layers here. A single canopy, a two-storied stand where you might have trees of two different age groups, and a multi-layered stand. Which of these do you think is going to be the most diverse? If you said the multi-layered stand, you'd be correct, because the greater the number of different layers we have in which to live, the greater the number of animals we'll be able to support, and other small plants. So layering the vertical structure has a deep impact on the diversity, how many different species we have growing in the area, growing and or living in the area. Because if you have more layers, that's more places, more habitats where species can live. And that has a huge impact, as you might expect, on diversity. If I have a classroom with 10 chairs, I can fit 10 different students. If I provide more places to sit, then I can support more students, and the diversity of my class increases. Here's another diagram that shows us, an illustration really, that shows us what some of those distributions in space can look like. So this is an illustration of different population distributions. When we think about where the water is or where the nutrients are, that's again going to have a really strong impact on how these plants are located in space. And so we can look at the population distribution. Where are the individuals in a given population, all living in the same place and time? Where are the individuals in that population located with respect to one another? And we see three major different kinds of population distributions. A clumped distribution, which we see represented here by the elephants. An even distribution, which we see represented by these creosote trees. And a random distribution, represented here by dandelion plants. Let's look at the clumped distribution first. When we have a clumped distribution, what we know is that the animals, in this case, are clumping based on the availability of resources. And this can happen for animals or plants or fungi or any species out in the habitat. So if you have a clumped distribution of these elephants, what that means is you probably have clumped resources that they need, such as water in watering holes, or acacia trees that are growing just in certain places on the African savanna. And so those elephants have to stay close to those acacia trees because that's what they're eating. We may also see a clumped distribution we may also see a clumped distribution in response to weather patterns. You guys probably all know that elephants have a really incredible migration that they employ every year, and basically they're following the water. And so they stay together in a herd because they're better off migrating from place to place. They're defending against predation, but they're also following a clumped distribution. There's just not a lot of water in that section of Africa, and so they have to go where the water is. In the middle picture, where we see the even distribution, These creosote bushes are doing exactly what I described before, which is they are exuding a toxin from their roots. And that toxin keeps roots from growing next to an individual plant. It's almost like when you guys were little kids and you were in gym class, and the gym class teacher said, okay, everybody stand double arm distance apart. You'd spread your arms, and that way nobody got too close to you. The creosote bush does the same thing, but they do that by exuding a toxin into the soil, which retards the growth of roots from other plants. And so we do see these very evenly spaced stands of vegetation in deserts. And it looks almost as if a farmer planted them. A farm is another place where you can see an even distribution. It's just not a natural system. With the random system, what you're talking about is, here's a place where there's plenty. There's a lot of water everywhere. There are evenly distributed soil nutrients, so it doesn't really matter where you grow. You can grow in a random pattern. The population distribution we see with the creosote bushes reflects that the water or soil nutrients, some kind of resource, might be evenly distributed, but there's not very much of it, so competition is quite high. And in order to keep that competition down, we see that use of allelopathy. And here's just one more look at population distribution. This time the example is bacteria growing in a petri dish. Do we see that evenly distributed situation where we've got bacteria growing throughout the petri dish? Are they growing randomly, which suggests that it doesn't matter where they grow because there's always going to be enough food for them? So that random distribution really tells us that we're in an area of high, rich resource capacity. The clumped distribution tells us that the resources themselves might be patchy, and so organisms have to grow and live in certain areas. Good. That's about it for community structure. We're going to continue talking about this in class by talking about the term succession. And this is a great way to recognize that species are impacting their environment and changing it. So I will see you guys in class next time.